Hi, everyone. You're listening to She's Got This. I'm your host, Christine Gallagher. Welcome. Today, we're talking about the quick and low stress way that I get this very podcast done. So I wanted to do a podcast for many years, and I always kind of put it off or avoided it or had some kind of weird idea in my head that it was more complicated than it really was. And it's funny because I did start one back in 2010 when I was a pure social media consultant, and it was about social media. And I did one episode and then totally abandoned it. So it had been a while when I decided to pick back up in 2022 and get it done. So I wanted to do this episode because I wanted to share that it can be really easy and simple, even though I put it off forever because I thought it wouldn't be. So happily, it has turned out to be a lot less stress than I thought it would be. First of all, know that the vibe that I decided to do this podcast with going in was very much the vibe of done is better than perfect. I try to make it as great as I can, of course, but I don't obsess over all the tiny details. And I'm not the kind of person who does everything the most fancy way. There are people that, they're awesome. They do podcasts in an actual studio with fancy equipment, and that's wonderful. But I wanted to do it again, very simply. So the fanciest thing for me is actually the microphone. That's really the only thing that I kind of put more thought into, and it is something I got on Amazon. It's called a Rode mic, RODE. It's one of the best ones out there. I decided to go for that because sound is really the most important thing with podcasts. And I'd been wanting a mic anyway because I do so many online trainings and Zooms and all of the things that I do for my business. So it just made sense. So the next thing that I did was I decided what are my main themes that I'm going to use for the episodes of the podcast. So this really goes to what do you teach your clients? What do you do? What are your areas of expertise? And these can be really broad because I find that going broader is good for me because I can fit a lot of topics under the broad categories. So for example, mine are marketing and manifestation pretty much. And everything that I've done on the podcast so far, I think we're on episode 24, has been under the umbrella of those two, one or the other, or a mix of them, because what I knew was that most of my content that I have already done that I've been using for years, and that is kind of in my little warehouse of content, falls under those categories. And so that was just kind of an obvious choice. So what I did was I first visited a few of my favorite podcasts or podcasts that I knew were pretty popular and that I admired and thought were done well. And what I did was I listened to them, listened to a couple of them for flow, like what is the flow? What do they do first, second, third? How do they close off the podcast? So I got ideas for scripting out my intro and my outro, which are really pretty short and simple, but I just wanted to see what do they say, what kind of things do they include. And I also got ideas from those podcasts for what to put in the description of my podcast. Like there's a blurb that you can use to upload your podcast to iTunes. Originally, you want to give it a description, who it's for, what it's about, what people can expect. So I got ideas for that as well. As far as content, I am lucky that I've been doing this for a long time and I have more content than I know what to do with. I've been doing this since 2009. And so I've got various things I can pull from: PowerPoint presentations and live event content and webinar content and content from work with my clients, content from old newsletters, blog posts, social media. I mean, it's tons and tons of content, and that has made it really easy. So it's nice if you have that to start with. Of course, you don't need that if you're feeling more creative and you want to come up with something brand new. You can. I do that too. It's just that in a pinch, I know that I can go get some great content that I've already done. So I'll go visit that content and use that, or I will do more of an off-the-cuff riffing situation in an episode where it really is me just kind of riffing on something. For example, something that's a big topic that I have a lot of thoughts on, creating money in your life, or something that maybe is going on in the industry. I'll get some ideas from and tie it to that, or even something that's happening in pop culture. And I also gave myself permission to do podcast lengths of whatever I want. Basically, short ones, longer ones. I believe the shortest so far that we've done is 4 minutes, and the longest has been about 25 or 30 minutes. And the other thing I gave myself permission to do is to do them solo for now without guests. I do plan to bring guests in, but I wanted to kind of get started the easiest, simplest way, as I've said. So for me, it was just me, the mic, and my content, and that works for me for now. So how I actually record the podcast is I have my Rode mic and I plug it into my laptop, or if I'm feeling like doing it on my desktop, I will do it there on my iMac. But you can basically plug in your mic wherever you want to record it. I use Zoom actually to record it. So I use Zoom just set on the audio setting, no video. You can add video if you want to have a podcast where, you're actually there on camera. I use the paid version of Zoom because I've been using it for years for client stuff and teaching classes and trainings like that. But there is a free version where you can record up to 40 minutes, and that can be really helpful as well. And I just simply record the audio on the computer. And when I'm recording, I have some notes in front of me, or I do something that I really call speak and pause. So I can have my notes because, as I said, I have a lot of content that I can pull from. So I'll have that in front of me, or maybe I'll take a piece of older content and I'll just break it out into bullet points to talk about. I am also known to script things out sometimes. So sometimes I do have a full script, but I don't like to do that much anymore because I want to really feel more natural and relaxed when I'm reading or when I'm looking at notes. And sometimes I just speak and pause, which is really off the top of my head. And I'll say the first couple of sentences of what I want to say, and then I'll hit pause, think about it for a moment, then come up with the next sentences, and on and on. Another thing that I'll do to make the content easy for me to pull from is if I have content that is from videos. So for example, I used to do my newsletter every week as a video rather than written. And I have lots and lots of videos that I have done before. They're about 5 minutes or so. And what we've done before is we've had somebody on my team actually transcribe the videos, but there are also services that you can use. There's a free one called Otter, O-T-T-R, that will transcribe your content for free, I think up to 30 minutes or so. And that's another way that you could take content and get it transcribed easily from a video or some other source. There's also rev.com. That's a paid service, but I've used them before and they're really helpful as well. So I record it on Zoom, but then I download the recording from Zoom. I download it directly to the desktop, but don't record to the cloud or anything. Download it to the desktop, grab it really easily because I know where it is. Then I actually use iMovie, which comes with Mac, and I do the editing in there. And the reason why I use iMovie is I've been using it for years because I started editing videos myself years ago and I was familiar with it and I just kind of can use it and not really think too hard about it. But you can also use something like GarageBand that comes on Mac, or there's a free program called Audacity, which you can edit audio and you can overlay music, same as with iMovie, GarageBand. And then there's also an option that's free called Zencaster. Now, I recorded my intro and my outro pieces first before I did any of the episodes. And I actually did them in Audacity. And the music that I used for the background, I got from the YouTube free audio library. So if you just Google YouTube free audio library, you can see that they have this repository of music that doesn't need you to give attribution and it's copyright free. That's really helpful. And there's also lots of other places you can get free music. If you Google royalty-free podcast music or free podcast music, you'll find a bunch of different sites that have options for you. Then what I do is I take that file that I download from iMovie and I upload it to Libsyn. So in iMovie, when I say editing, what I really mean is I cut out any silences or anywhere maybe I'm tripping over my words, and then I put the intro and the outro on either end of the file. And then it becomes one big file that I download. So it gets uploaded to Libsyn, Libsyn, and this is a service that is pretty inexpensive. I think it's $7 a month. And the great thing about it is it allows you to upload your audio and add a graphic, add a description, episode number, season number, your name, keywords so that people can find it. And it will disseminate your podcast to several different platforms. So for example, it sends it to YouTube, it sends it to Spotify, Apple, iHeartRadio, Amazon Music, etc., all at one time, which is really nice. You also want to have some sort of graphic for your podcast, not only for putting it in Libsyn with each episode, but you probably are going to want to use the same thing or something like that when you're posting your podcast on social media. So what we did was we created a main graphic in Canva, which is basically a picture of me and the name of the podcast and my name. And that is like our standard go-to graphic anytime we upload our podcast to Libsyn that gets put across all the different platforms. And I will also use that same graphic when I post my episode to social media, for example, on Instagram. Sometimes I'll switch it up for social media and I will use Canva for just a graphic that is sort of branded with the name of the episode and the season and the number of the episode. And I switch that out with the graphic of me just to give it a little more variety. And then what I do once it's been uploaded to the platforms, and this doesn't take long, by the way, through Libsyn. It takes maybe 10, 15 minutes to get it into Apple. I feel like Apple takes the longest, but Spotify, Amazon Music, etc., they seem to be a little bit faster. But as soon as that goes up, then I can promote it because you get the link to the actual podcast episode once it's uploaded. And so what we do is we usually do a weekly email to promote the episode. So we'll send an email to our list and we'll give a brief description of what the podcast is about and links to download it on a few different platforms so people can have a choice. And we'll add the graphic for the podcast in the email and we'll send it out. Same thing with social. We'll do the same description and photo and links and put that in social. For example, on Instagram, we use something called Linktree, which is free. If you Google Linktree, you can open an account and it allows you to add a link in your bio that can link to multiple different things you want to send people to. One of them could be your podcast. And honestly, that is really it. So just to give you kind of a behind the scenes peek of this, I came up with this episode while laying in my bed and jotting it in my notes app on my iPhone. So this wasn't something where I wrote out a whole script or even had massive bullet points or pulled from past content. It was like me thinking, how do I do this? What's the procedure of how I do this? And just made a few notes about that. Now, I will say that to make this even easier, it's great if you have somebody on your team or people on your team to help you with this. Not saying you can't do this yourself, because in a pinch, I've done all the parts myself. But if you do have somebody like a virtual assistant, they can make it easier by doing the editing or doing the graphics or uploading any kind of part that we talked about can be delegated to them as well. And that'll make it even easier for you. But if it's just you solo for now, just know that you can do it in a simple way and it doesn't have to be really time consuming or complicated.